Committee meeting for May 26th. Tonight we will be reviewing the general government, which consists of several different departments, as well as police and fire general services. The intent right now is to have a public hearing at the end of the presentations. After presentations, we have the ability, as council asks, as a Finance Committee, to ask the manager questions, of course. And I would, just for your planning purposes, after the public hearing, don't typically do this, but I think it might be healthy to do tonight, and that is give us a chance to even ask follow-up questions to the manager or discussion amongst ourselves after we hear public testimony. Just so the plan, okay?
Sounds fair.
So with that, Mr. Manager, the floor is yours.
Members of the council, tonight we'll review general government, police, fire, general services, and then, as you said, have a public hearing at the end. So you'll, again, this, the entire budget and the order that we'll go through it is all on the city's website, so if people want to go to that, they can. So you'll want to go to item number 4, general government. The general government, you want to be on page 63. And this is a summary of all of the departments in this section, so you can see that all put together. And so we'll start going now through each department individually. On page 65, if you forward to that, you'll see this is the city manager's office. There are no revenues budgeted in either 2022 or fiscal year 23. However, you will notice that $10,000 amount in the revised budget, which is from surplus for education and training purposes, that was not budgeted in the fiscal year 22 budget. So the dollars, that was money that was put in after the budget that you approved. So there is $10,000 there. Expenses budget to budget are up $30,500 due to regular wages and benefits. I've kept the budget amount of approximately $90,000 that was for the ICMA Management Fellow last year, and I'm describing as an economic development position for fiscal year 23. As we talked about the first night, it is currently vacant, and we'll provide the City Council flexibility as to add a position for similar purposes when I return to City Council with a proposal. Be glad to answer any questions for the City Manager's budget.
Thank you very much. Who has questions on the manager's portion? Anyone? Okay. Legal.
So the next is legal. That's on page 68. On page 68, revenues budget to budget are flat in our, and the other government agency line calls for a 2% increase to other communities for which we provide prosecutorial services. As you know, the city provides services for Bow, Dumbarton, and Loudoun. Expenses budget to budget are up $153,000 or 11.9%. $127,000 of that $153,000 is for the increase to reinstate an assistant prosecutor position, and the remaining $26,000 is for all other wages and benefits. I'll be glad to answer any questions with that.
Any questions? Councilor Pierce.
Is that due to caseload that we're increasing that?
Yes.
Funding that position?
So if you take a look at the case type and group, we looked at that at the, this is at the district division. The city of Concord, just alone to put this in perspective for Concord, we have for calendar year 21, we were up to 4,228 cases. If you put that in perspective, say for Manchester, it's 3,169. So it is the highest caseload in the state, and it has to do really, I think, it's a reflection of the great work of the police department and making sure that they're getting out there, getting their job done, and that then translated in the prosecutor's office. You know, the idea was that when we eliminated the position a while back, we were going to try to see if, based on the changes that were occurring at the state and regarding bail reform and different things, would work. And it turns out the caseload just keeps increasing. And now, of course, now the courts did take a hiatus, but they're back in session now and moving fast. So we believe this position is needed.
Thank you.
I thought this had to do with felonies first, and then,
Yeah.
so, help me, you gotta give me a little more than, it's the great work of the police department. I mean, why is our caseload so significantly more than any other, particularly Hillsborough County? It just sounds,
Like, maybe I should probably have
Probably a good idea,
Jim
yeah.
Kennedy come up,
Yeah.
but yes, the, now we got one seat.
That's okay, I'll stand.
Okay.
I perfectly fine standing. I'm good.
why don't, wasn't the prosecutor sit and you stand?
Yeah, why don't you have a seat?
Yeah.
Some gentlemen.
He's gonna do more talking, so.
You know, I was gonna move the book, but.
Yeah.
Don't move the book.
When
So my question centers around,
Does everyone know Tracy Connolly? She's our city prosecutor. And I believe
Yep.
most of you all should know.
We're the city council.
how many years have you been here?
23 in July.
Yeah. We've been lucky to have you, thank you.
Thank you.
So we took a position away, if I remember correctly, a lot of it had to do with felonies first and such, and now that seems to have kind of unraveled, and your caseloads are still way up. Is that the reason for going back to, what's the cause or the need to, and is one the right number, or is it?
Well, right now, we're seeing, these numbers right now from the courts, throughout all the circuit courts where the prosecutors practice. The city of Concord, the court in Concord is the highest volume court of all criminal cases in the state for this year. That could be a number of reasons. Think about what's going on here. We're close proximity to the prison. We've got a number of different issues going on. We're full staff right now with the police department. And it's a busy docket. Tracy can tell you about the types of cases that we're seeing, but they are extraordinarily busy there right now. We reduced it to 3, thinking that the felonies first, as Your Honor has indicated, would reduce the load as we're no longer doing those arraignments of misdemeanors that are attached to felonies. And we thought, okay, there's going to be a slowdown. But we have not seen that. We have seen an uptick. And what's also happening is that felonies first is ending. The great idea that the court system had of starting all felonies at the Superior Court versus the District Court is coming to an end. That bill was passed this year. It's going into effect. Felonies and all arraignments are going to come back to the District Court. We need to be ready for that tidal wave. The other tidal wave that's happened is that the courts all but stopped many trials for COVID, as we know. And so there's been a huge backlog. That backlog is translating into multiple trials for our prosecutors throughout the week, which is an incredible challenge, incredible burden for these 4 prosecutors that we have. Just by way of comparison, so that you can understand and appreciate this, Manchester, with its numbers, that it has 7 full-time prosecutors. Right now we have 3. These guys need help. The police department needs help. We need to reinstate this position. We tried it last year as a one-time, see where we're at, and quite frankly, the courts were closed. I mean, so we could manage it, and these guys did manage it. But right now, we're seeing the uptick, and I can't tell you enough. Tracy can certainly tell you the day-to-day experience that she's having at the prosecutor's office and at the district court on Clinton Street. They need more help, and we're looking for that from you.
Thank you, Your Honor. To Mr. Kennedy or Mr. Aspel, just based on your analysis, Mr. Kennedy, I'm curious if we could or would anticipate an increased volume from these outside municipalities that we represent. And secondly, how is that rate calculated to Bow or Hopkinton or these other towns that we represent? And does that change based on volume?
It hasn't, the volumes in those towns, Dunbarton, Bow, Loudoun's a little bit higher, but they're smaller than Concord. And we look at that each year, and we've been just tracking it gradually going up. I think over the past 5 years, it's gone up about 10% or more. It'll continue to go up, and we're going to continue. We're actually going to be, spending some more time looking at that, about the time that they're spending on each of those cases versus the Concord cases. But those, from what I understand, aren't creating the burden and challenges that the volume that Concord in and of itself is creating right now.
Thank you.
There was a question that came up earlier this year regarding the victim witness assistance, and we made a change in a previous budget that the goal was to give you more flexibility and actually increase the level of service. It might be worthwhile to just touch upon that.
We do have 2 full-time victim witness advocates in the office. Previously, we used a victim witness advocate from AmeriCorps program. We've since eliminated that due to some of the challenges, the procedural challenges working with AmeriCorps, just with our office, because they were regulated to only certain types of victim cases. But for us, we wanted to have a victim advocate, A, be familiar with all the cases, and B, be able to be there full-time, always working with victims that need assistance on a day-to-day basis, on a full-time basis. And so we brought that into the office, and it's been effective. We may, however, be coming back to you again and to the manager saying, we need more help. And so you might see us back here next year saying, we might need an additional victim advocate in the office, because that's a service that we take very seriously. The attorneys do a lot of it as well as the victim advocates in the office. And so it's a huge responsibility. It's something we take extraordinarily seriously. And quite frankly, that's something that we could be looking at more help in the future. I know Manchester, you know, they have a victim witness advocate there. They have 2 full-time and then 1 DV, domestic victim witness advocate full-time. So we may be looking at that in the future.
I just had one more unless anybody else. In talking to my peers across the state, one of the biggest challenges that cities have faced, and towns for that matter, has been the increase in demand for right-to-know requests and the time in which it takes to meet those requests. How has your office handled that? And you know, when I see an asterisk next to a number, it just kind of it's a bit of a flag that it pops out. And
Right.
How much time is that taking away from some of your other responsibilities?
It depends on the request, right? I mean, some requests, we've got those requests and we've got the documents immediately available. There's no redactions. They're ready for the public, and those are easy. Some are more complex. They take legal analysis, and some will take days or weeks to figure out the law relative to the question presented. And that is very time consuming. But we have a process where we've trained, and we're continuing to train all of our employees that respond. And so we've done a very good job. We have a very, very good paralegal in our office who does an exceptional job cataloging and working with all the departments throughout the city to responding to the right-to-know requests. Right now, we're on top of it. The police department, we've also worked very closely with the chief and his staff over there, because they get a bulk of requests as well. But we have them, and they go through training as well, where they're able to maintain and many of those requests without having to go through the legal department. Fire as well can handle a certain level of routine, everyday type requests that come in where they've been trained to respond to those types of requests. All of the departments in the city come through our office, and we maintain the workload. Like I said, some are more complex, but as government you know, becomes more complex, maybe the right-to-know requests are becoming more voluminous. We've seen on the average, I don't know, 3, 4 a week. I mean, depending on the complexity, they can take more and more time. But right now, I think we're handling it. But if we bring on this 4th prosecutor, I know that a couple years ago we created a position where they could be a prosecutor and civil. I'm not so sure that's going to work right away for this 4th prosecutor, because of the volume at that office is off the charts right now. They're very, very busy.
Thank you. Anybody else? I don't make sure. Thank you. I both appreciate you being here. Mr. Manager, I think we're moving on to assessing.
Your Honor, assessing department starts on page 71. So revenues budget to budget are down $20,000, or 2.9%, is due to a reduction in the several payment in lieu of tax agreements. Remember, those are volunteer. Other payment in lieu of tax agreements have actually seen small increases, so you can see how that actually sugars out to $20,000 down. Expenses budget to budget are up $58,000, or 8.2%, and that's really due to regular changes in wages and benefits. And as I mentioned during the original presentation, I'm starting to propose reinstatement of training dollars into the budgets, and so this has an additional $6,000 in training made available for all the members of the department. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council Pierce.
Mr. City Manager, can you tell me how many entities within the city use the pilot program? You have, just off the top of your head? No?
Dozen,
A dozen? Okay.
roughly. I can get you the actually.
I think it's in our revenue numbers.
I thought there was a breakdown also.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? So, Mr. Manager, the Board of Assessors has advised us, or advised you, for a very, very expensive task to seriously look at the need to do a overall reevaluation.
Yes.
What is your thoughts?
I think there's, in this year, I mean, it was very close to including in this year's budget. But I thought, given all the other expenses that you have, it'd be very difficult to be able to do something. And it's my thought that, not just my thought, I think many people's thoughts, that the housing market is probably approaching peak. So I don't know if you'd want to actually bring in those numbers right now at that time. Also, I think the approach we can take, and I think you see this in the budget, in other parts of the budget, we could spread it, because it's such a large geographic city, it'd be difficult to get it all done in 1 year. So maybe you could potentially spread it out over several years and accomplish what the Board of Assessors is asking for. But the time is coming to do it. The question is just be, when do you really want to make that expense and undertake that initiative? Because generally you can see when those efforts are undertaken, it's usually quite a traumatic event in any community. Particularly, and I'm thinking right now with the height of the residential market and even though commercial rates have been increasing, they just have not been, as you know, they have not been increasing at the same rate as residentials.
Council Chaplain.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Spell, what would be the benefit of revaluation to the city?
Well, I think it'd be, you're trying to ensure the equity amongst the owners of all the properties. But also, I think what you end up normally picking up is any type of improvements that have been made that have not been permitted. So generally what happens is and most people do pull permits and before they make improvements, and then we go out and we'll do inspections, and then they become part of the overall assessed value, and then they get taxed. But there also are generally, in most communities where these are done, significant improvements that have been made over time, generally interior, and you don't pick those up until you actually get inside the properties to do those. And you can imagine getting into roughly taking a look at 14,000 different pieces of property. That could take you some time. And then also you'd want to make sure there's an opportunity for people to review those new estimates that you come up with and have the ability to explain why they are the way they are. And but the idea is that everything would be more equitable, and you'd pick up additional revenues associated with the things that were permitted. Now, that doesn't mean you bring in additional dollars. It just means the people who actually are already being taxed and already are on the rolls actually would be paying slightly less, because now that pie would be spread out a little bit wider.
Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
Thank you. Do you think that it would have any chance of trying to kind of rebalance or reestablish the balance between residential property taxpayers and commercial property taxpayers?
I think the difficulty is that depending on when you do it, because you bring in those numbers, and while we do an annual reval, so to speak, in terms of making adjustments, you continue to do that, and you'd make those. They would slide each, different ways each year. But once you actually get those numbers in there, My concern is that the residential market is still so hot in Concord, because Concord is still so popular, that the residential market could even take on even more of the property.
Thank you.
Councilman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you remind us, please, and the public also, when was the last time that the city did such a revaluation? Do you recall?
It predates me. I would have to bring up the assessor.
That's why I asked the question. I couldn't recall either.
It hasn't been in the last couple decades.
2003 or 4, somewhere in there.
I try to block that memory out. So to follow up on the question though, do you, I understand your comment about the hot real estate residential market, no question, you can see that every time you open the Sunday paper and look at chain places and such. But we did see a shift, a significant shift, where the residents were picking up a much greater burden, where the commercial sector was seeing a whole lot of relief because during COVID, people stayed home. So do you think the statistical analysis that will be done this year, that we recently approved, will have some effect to pick up those commercial properties that are now back in full use? See people going back to the office, parking lots are full now.
I think you'll see in my estimate, I'm not an assessor, that's why I have people do that. You're welcome to bring her up if you like. I think you're going to see the commercial and many of the commercial pieces growing faster than they grew last year, but the residential market and maybe not growing quite as fast as it did last year, but it's probably still higher in growth than the commercial piece. So that shift that you talked about last year, there still may be a shift, but it won't be as great as it was in the past.
But we've had the sale. Maybe we could
I
have the
wanna bring
assessor.
her
Let
up.
me have the
It's-
assessor
sure.
one. The STEM check?
She's coming.
Your Honor, could I ask the city manager to move the microphone a little closer to him? I was listening to loud music on Tuesday, and I may be a little deaf now.
Jazz will do that.
It wasn't jazz.
Okay.
Cabaret.
Well, welcome. And
Thank you.
It's great to see you, and thank you for all your work for the city. As you can imagine, we heard as well as you did from a lot of residential homeowners when they got their tax bill and saw, in some cases, a significant increase. And after a discussion about what their houses are worth, I mean, they understood that part. The shift was the hardest for people to grasp. And it seems like, just anecdotally, that the commercial sector is back to going pretty strong. I mean, perhaps not some pieces, but, looking at the sale of some of the commercial properties, they've been doing okay. Do you anticipate with the statistical updates that we do each year that it will recapture or some of that commercial that we lost and saw the shift that occurred? And hopefully that question made some sense.
What I'm hearing you say is you're asking me if I think when we do the statistical update this year, will there be some shift in tax burden from off of the residential back onto the commercial?
Yes.
I would say that there's probably some segments of the commercial property where there will be an increase in value, but as the city manager explained, I don't believe that that's going to be enough because of the increase in the residential property, that there's going to be like this huge shift off of residential and they're paying less of the burden than the commercials. And I think until we see a cool down of what's happening in the residential market, that we're going to continue to see that shift.
Okay. And I was looking for you to bring me joy.
I think I'm hoping next year will be a little bit different answer to that. And I think primarily because the tremendous amount of interest from the just call it the home building community, residential building community is really focused on Concord. And I think that supply and demand issue will help dramatically, but that takes time. To get into ground and people to move in here. Sure, there'll be new people moving into the community, but also it will help with the other issues and other pieces. So we'll get there, but and again, it's whatever the date is as of April 1st too. So that's just gone by.
Okay. Anyone else, since we have the assessor here? Sure.
I think there was a question about, I'm not sure who asked about when was the last time we did a full measure and list of the community. That was in 1989 for the 1990 reval.
Wow.
So a long time ago.
All right. Anything further? Thank you, and I really appreciate everything you do. You have an amazing reputation statewide, and we are incredibly lucky to have you, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions with assessing, let's move to human resources.
So human resources, you want to be on page 74. Revenues budget to budget are flat, as you can see. Expenses budget to budget are up $55,000 or 8.9%, due to a $20,000 increase for benefits consultant that we brought on, and a $5,000 increase for our circuit diversity posting that we're undertaking, and the regular wages and benefit changes that are in there. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions?
Your Honor?
Yes, sorry.
Just off the top of your head, and I don't want to put you on the spot, how do you feel the diversity, equity, and inclusion training is going?
Excellent. We actually had a segment that we did for all the department heads yesterday for 6 hours. And one of the pieces that the human resources director put in place with this, I mentioned the circuit diversity posting. So with that, what we're going to be doing is, or what we have been doing is, that what they do is they scrape our job listings and they post them at 600 different national sites around the country, including blackcareers.org, wehirewomen.com, veteranjobs.net, disabilityjobs.net, and all LGBTQ jobs.com. So there's a whole approach that I think that we're taking. We're trying to be much more aggressive about all ends of not only training for existing employees, but actually trying to make sure we diversify. And then when we diversify and as we diversify, make sure that it's in a way that it's an inclusionary process and people actually get to participate in all levels of decision making. So.
Follow up, Your Honor? Do you feel we have a welcoming atmosphere in City Hall?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Finance?
So on finance, you'll want to start on page 77. Revenues budget to budget are up $3.3 million or 5.8%. Property tax revenue is the main driver here, up due to an increase in the property tax revenue of $2.5 million. Motor vehicle registrations are up $350,000. Investment income is up $755,000. Use of fund balance is down $1.4 million, as I had presented earlier. Rooms and meals tax is up $1 million budget to budget. Also noted that is $30,000 is budgeted in other revenue for the Briar Hydro net metering agreement that you entered into, that we are anticipating to be finalized. We just finalized it, so we'll be announcing that very shortly about how that will all work. Expenses budget to budget are up $73,000 or 3%, and that's $2,800 is being reinstated for training, and that also includes regular wages and benefit increases. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you. As I recall, towards the end of our, I guess I might be getting this wrong, but in this fiscal year, we had a significant increase in people paying back taxes, and we sort of recognized one-time revenue.
Right.
Do we have any projections as to what we might expect on that for next year, or is the assumption that really that was just a one-time thing, and there's not back taxes out there that might come through with the sale of additional residential properties?
All right, I can bring Mr. LeBrun up for that, but.
We were just talking about this item today. We don't have any anticipation that there's going to be the same type of major increase that we saw last year. We're hoping that it doesn't, that number can go up or down, and we call it the 60-day rule. So it's looking at what the accounts receivable are for taxes and that 60-day period after the end of the fiscal year, and that's how we come up with that calculation. Last year was an anomaly by having that big of an increase. Usually goes up or down a couple $100,000. We're anticipating that it will be back to that up or down $100 to $200,000. Hopefully it isn't a big drop where people have slowed down in paying their taxes, but that's what our anticipation is, maybe back to the same normal that we've seen previous years.
Just a follow-up. Where do we show that revenue? Does that go to the unassigned fund balance, or where does that end up?
No, that revenue is actually picked up in the property tax revenue. So if we look at the property tax line for actual for FY21, it's actually a little bit higher than what we budgeted because of that actual year-end adjustment.
Thank you. Don't go yet.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Pierce.
I have a question on the transfer in from the trust. I see that we last year had $52,000 and there's $0 in the budget this year. Can you explain what that is, please?
So in February, we processed with the City Council, and the City Council approved the supplemental appropriation for the surplus. So every year we provide a surplus report to the Council based on the previous year's final financial results. In that surplus, we usually allocate funds for transfer to capital funds for paving and equipment and things like that. This is part of that, so we transferred money out to the trusts for all of those equipment type of things. And then we usually bring some of that money back into the operating budget. That's why you see it in the budget revised budget line. And in the finance department, we brought $52,000 in. $42,000 of it was for counters for the collections office. We're going to in the capital budget, there's a request for some improvements to the collections office. This is in anticipation of that because of the lead time of getting furniture from a lot of our suppliers. And then we have another $10,000 allocation that was requested and approved by council for other miscellaneous equipment purchases throughout the year, which we don't budget a lot of money for equipment. Usually we do it at the surplus time to try to have a little bit of funds available for some things that need to be replaced or repaired.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Perhaps you could give us, since you're here, an update on ERP, and are you ready to go live with the module?
Open enrollment.
Yeah.
Well, open enrollment, we'll start with that. So we are actually doing our first open enrollment in our new ERP software, Munis. So that is actually going on as we speak. I completed mine yesterday.
How'd it go?
It went pretty good.
Okay.
It went pretty good. I spoke with Robin as I was doing it because I had a couple of questions, and there's a couple of things that we had anticipated would be brought forward with the software that they kind of missed on a little bit. So we're working with them to get that straightened out. So the first year is, it went very well, except for one little piece. So we're working to have them corrected on that. So that part is very good. The other piece that we have going live as of June 1st is the new the utility billing module. And so you'll see a little bit different utility bills. I keep saying tax. You'll see a little bit different utility bill around June 15th is when that first bill is going to go out. So we're working in those final stages of making sure that we have everything reconciled through May 31st. June 1st, we're going to pull the trigger and go live, and then they're going to finish up all the pieces they have. We'll probably have to hold some payments for the first few days of June while we do the rest of that transition. I believe about June 6th, that will be ready to go, and we'll be starting to apply payments in the new ERP for utility billing, and then the first bill will go out in June 15th. So that will bring us to three of the 4 modules. We'll have the payroll and HR module will be live. We'll have the financial module, which was the first one. That one is live. That's been live for almost 3 years now. And then we'll have the utility billing module, which will be live as of June 1st. And then we have just started working on the tax module, and that we anticipate will go live on May 1st next year, barring any complications that, we have to have some delays. But we want to make sure it's better to make it go live right than to try to hurry it and have some mistakes that we really don't want to see.
So will the residents see, what will they see when they get their new utility bill?
When they get the new utility bill, it'll basically be all the same information. It'll have a little different look and feel because it's basically the canned bill that Munis uses for the majority of their customers. So we're trying to stay as systematic as possible without having any major modifications to those bills. So the customer will see a different looking bill. It'll have a, and when you open your envelope, you'll actually open it so that it's all opened the correct way. It's not going to be upside down.
You have no idea how many people ask.
I know. We've had this discussion, and you would think it would be an easy solution to solve, and somehow it just seemed to be more complicated. But I have to hand it to Adam Clark and those folks at General Services that have really been able to pull that together and make that all happen. So, and it really has to do with the way the file is transferred to the printer, and you don't really want to care all that other stuff.
I figured
the
we got a
machine they
million
printed on.
envelopes on sale.
Right. Yeah, we had to use up the rest of the envelopes because we already paid for them. So we'll start to see the correct side envelope.
Any further question on finance? Councilor Brown.
Hi, you may have already addressed this, but could you discuss the investment income that's $800,000?
So if you recall in past years, we've had investment income, up as high as $1.5 million to $1.7 million, back 10 or 12 years ago. The interest rate has gone down tremendously over the past few years. Up even until 3 or 4 years ago, we were still earning several $100,000 a year. And then when COVID hit, the interest rates really kind of bottomed out. And so we've been, our interest income or our interest rate has been around 0.1% for the past 3 years. And so this year, you see with the changes in the economy, and the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates already. So they raised 1/4 point back in February. They just raised another 0.5 point in May. They're anticipated that they will raise another 0.5 point in June or the beginning of July, and then another 0.5 point after that, and then probably another couple of 1/4 points anyway before the end of the calendar year. Well, if you think about 0.1% on the interest rate versus 0.5%, that's a lot of increase. And so we've done a calculation to try to determine approximately what will that number be if we achieve probably 75% of the rate increases that they're anticipating. I can't guarantee it, but we're trying to do our best at estimating that, and that's where we came up with the 800,000. So we've been budgeting and collecting 50,000 or a little bit less for the past few years, but this year we think that there's a pretty significant chance that that number is going to be around $800,000 between now and the end of the fiscal year for FY23.
Thank you.
Councilor Madsen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to have you maybe reiterate for the people at home that you're doing this on a conservative side on your estimations?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely try to be conservative in our revenue estimates. I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. Unfortunately, I can't promise. My crystal ball doesn't really work that well to say I know exactly what those rates are going to be. But based on everything that we're seeing, based on everything that we're reading, and I try to follow it pretty closely, there's, and if you follow the Federal Reserve, everybody can see that there's, suggesting that there's going to be some significant rate increases over the next, 10 or 12 months.
Thank you. Follow up, Your Honor? And so if they weren't to materialize, you have a plan in place to address certain things?
We do. If these things don't materialize, and I'll throw the auto registrations because that number's gone up 350,000 in the same bucket. If those things don't materialize, then we are going to have to readdress the expenditures in the budget so that we can make some adjustments to try to make sure that our numbers come in. Tom and I have talked about that. You know, is there a level of risk of making these assumptions? Yes, but we make these assumptions every year. You know, we've certainly made a lot of assumptions as they were going down, but now's the time to make the assumptions going up. But, you know, we watch it very closely. We do financial statements internally every month. I watch the financial statements, you know, every day, and then we provide this information to the City Council on a quarterly basis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? So one of the goals that you've had for last year as well as this year is around cooperative purchasing. I think you've been successful in some of your endeavors. You've talked about doing these with other communities, other cities and such. Have you reached out or have you ever had any success with either of the 2 school districts we have in the city?
I can't say for sure that we've worked closely with the school districts on purchasing items specifically, but we have worked with the state, and we've worked with other communities, and we actually work with, and we do work with fuel, excuse me, yeah, so with the school districts. So at least the Concord School District is purchasing fuel with us right now. The Merrimack Valley School District was, but they've taken a different approach for this coming year.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And just to put in perspective, just actually not that long ago, 2019, we were bringing $896,000 in interest income in 2019. So that was just prior, just prior to COVID really hitting. So.
All right. Seeing no further questions on finance, I think it moves us to IT.
So information technology, you want to be on page 80. There is no revenue budgeted in fiscal year 23. Expenses budget to budget are up $230,000 or 19.9%. $3,000 of this increase is for training for the IT employees themselves. $21,800 is for security-related efforts, so that would be training and actual improvements to the system for security. $131,000 for this increase is the network security engineer. The remaining increase is due to wages and benefits. So recall, you already approved the network security engineer, but that was approved out of fund balance in this past year. So now you're actually budgeting for it to add it to the budget. Glad to answer any questions.
Anyone? Okay, seeing none.
Next section is on page 83. This is the City Council. And expenses budget to budget are down $2,000 or 4.3% due to a decrease in the council orientation expenses. You only do that every other year. Thank goodness.
Anyone else? Question on City Council? Okay, next.
On page 95 is the city clerk's budget. So you got to scroll a little bit to get there. Revenues budget to budget are up $6,000 or 7%, mainly due to increases in recording fees, sundry services, and school district payments. And of course, school district payments relate to the elections. Expenses budget to budget are up $73,000 or 14.6%. This is due to an increase in election costs for the primary, which will occur in fiscal year 23, and the cost of renting space for the elections and the regular wage and benefit costs. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Councilor Craven.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. City Manager, in the appendix where there is the city clerk's summary, there are a number of items related to election building rental. There's for Ward 3, Ward 6, Ward 8. Is that for I know in Ward 3, because of COVID, we're using the tent, and you have to bring in lighting, and you have to bring in heat, because it is November. Is that where these expenses are coming from?
So the city clerk gave me a very detailed list, so I could not mess this up. So the election for Ward 3, there's $5,490 increase included for the renting of heaters and the lights at Beaver Meadow Golf Course. And the tent, we'll be using at the tent. And the cost per election, and the reason it's $5,490 is because there's 2 elections. So it's $2,745 per election. For Ward 6, there's $1,020 increase in funds for the general liability insurance expenses incurred by Christ the King Church as mandated by the Diocese of Manchester, so that we may use the parish hall on election days. It is $510 per election for elections to be held in September and November of '22. For Ward 8, there's $1,890 increase for the use of Bektesh Temple. The city of Concord has traditionally rented half of the hall, but additional space will provide, we need to rent because demand is greater. We rent additional space for adequate social distancing for the employees of all the future elections, so the rental cost will increase from $810 to $1,750. And of course, as Janice would like me to point out, staff remains grateful that all the polling locations of the city uses are still being used, and they allow us to set up a day before election day and a breakdown afterwards. So it's been a good relationship. Also, there's $8,500 in there for funds for mailings, because we need to notify people of all the different wards they're now located in for anybody who's moved. So we actually calculate out that be approximately 15,000 postcards going out to people, explaining to them where their polling location is.
Thank you.
Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you. And following up on Councilor Kretovik's question, will we be sending postcards to residents of wards where the polling place has changed as well, or is it just people who have moved from a different ward?
So I'll read what she wrote for me to make sure you get it right. So the notify of the residents of Ward 1, 4, and 5 of the polling locations. A mailing will also be sent to those residents within the city that have either been relocated to other wards as a result of the 2021 redistricting changes. Funds will cover the printing and postage for approximately 15,000 cards notifying residents within the community. So she's notifying the residents, not just the registered voters. Everybody's going to receive notification who have been impacted in some way.
Anyone else? So I noticed, so I was really grateful that you put the money in to notify folks, because I think that's important with the redistricting and changing up locations and such. And I'm always grateful to the school district opening their doors and being as cooperative in the use of those public buildings. But one of the things I noticed you didn't fund were some new signage to direct people to the new locations. And in the last municipal election, we had many people in, say, Ward 7, they were still going to the West Street Ward House. They were no longer, which is no longer being used, not going to school. And with these other changes, Ward 1 and such, do you think the mailing is sufficient, or do you think some signs would actually help?
Signs could always help, but it just somewhere along the line, you have to draw the line about how much can you afford to spend. And I try to remember what that number was. It was 85?
3,000.
How much was it?
3,000.
3,000. It was $3,000 too much for when I was putting together the budget. It's not something. It's not something that wouldn't be a good idea to do. It's just it's $3,000.
So when people go to the wrong place, can I just forward them your number?
Absolutely. I'll know what day.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Takes us to the next item, which would be, where are we now? General overhead.
So you want to go to general overhead. That starts on page 97. Page 97, budget to budget revenues are up $1.2 million, or 28.8%. This is due to an increase of $60,000 transfer in from the parking fund, a $40,000 transfer in from impact fees, and this is to support debt service costs. $945,000 transfer in from the ARPA funds that we've talked about in the past. $111,000 transferred in from the golf fund. $40,000 increase in transfer in from the wastewater fund, and $75,000 increase in retiree health insurance. On page 98, expenses budget to budget are up $771,000, or 5.9%. This is due to $111,000 transfer out of trust for paving reserve, $260,000 transfer out to capital projects, $136,000 decrease in debt service costs, $210,000 increase in retiree health costs, a $331,000 increase in the comp adjustment figure that we talked about, $8,000 decrease to Concord Community Television because the revenue had changed, $10,000 increase to in-town Concord, $6,000 increase to the capital area transit system, $10,000 increase to the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness, $10,000 decrease to the Friends program, $20,000 decrease to the Petticoat Community Center. And the next couple of pages provide brief descriptions of the items in the general overhead department, which you can see. And this completes the general government section. Budget, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Anybody have questions, general government? Okay. You know what? Considering, excuse me?
Earl.
I thought Earl had a question.
You looked right at me.
Sorry, Councilor Pierce.
Small but mighty.
The transfer-ins from the TIF districts,
Yes.
we're looking at the Pennacook TIF, and I see $5,000 budgeted. Is that just the city portion? Or does that include, schools is a different number, I assume?
Yes.
On
just the city.
page 97,
Mhm. That would just be the city section.
that's the city's portion. Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. Since we have a pretty good sized crowd here, why don't you take a break?
Yeah.
And we're gonna do a public hearing, on this, first section, of our, general government, including our general overhead. And that way, hopefully, maybe some people can go home early if they were so choose. So at this time, we'll open the public hearing on any one of the items that you've just heard. So, city manager, legal, assessing, IT, finance, anyone you just heard. Anybody wish to testify?
So that,
What's that?
I was gonna say that the reason those dollars for TIF are transferred is the expenses associated with the city takes on for the management of those
Right.
TIFs.
Good evening, Mr. Swiker. How are you?
Oh, I guess I'm all right.
It's good to
Can
see
you
you.
hear me?
It's good to see you. We can, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, good to see you.
Okay. I'm going to take 2 minutes to talk about structural racism, and that's things where you're not deliberately racist, but the effective procedures and systems is such that people of different groups are adversely affected more so. And in Concord, that's easy to do because we have a lot of people of color who have come from overseas and essentially have nothing. So it's very easy for them to kind of lose out on things. And you may know that nationwide, one of the big issues with equity is not that the people of the diverse races aren't getting the same income as other people, but that they have less wealth. And once again, people who come overseas with nothing are very likely to have less wealth than people whose families have been here for a while. So I think that it's very important to start looking at, what you can do to try and eliminate structural racism where you can. And so I'm going to talk about the assessing department. I think that before you do a citywide assessment, you need to do what they call a functional audit of the assessing department, because I think you have a real problem with the assessments in this city. I think that they lead to structural racism. I don't think they conform to generally accepted accounting practices. I don't think they conform to state regulations regarding assessing, and I don't think they conform to the assessing standards. And
So just to clarify, you know there's no money in this budget that does an overall reevaluation, but that's not being considered. It just, there's a statistical update, which we just had 3 hearings on. Is that what you're referring to?
no, what I'm asking is, I would like to have money put in the budget to do a functional audit of the assessing department to see that the way they assess properties in the city is proper before we then go out and reassess the entire city using a flawed mechanism. And I will give you some examples from myself. I'm fairly confident that my property is overassessed by $15,000. The problem I have is, that probably cost me $500 in taxes. The problem I have is, if I was to try to take this to the, court, or try to take it to the, state property valuation people, by the time I pay the filing fee and the assessor and the attorney, it's going to cost me far more than $5,000, and there's nothing that keeps the assessor from giving me the same number next year, even if I win the case this year. So for an ordinary person, essentially, you cannot appeal assessments outside the city. It's just cost prohibitive. It's compared to if you're a business and you do like one business I'm aware of, they just got a $3 million reduction in their taxes. Obviously, you can afford to pay the filing fee and the attorney and the assessor. So this is, where the structural racism comes in. It's too expensive for people to, deal with stuff like this. And I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The property I own, if you can believe it, is worth $817,000 an acre. That's compared to the Love Your Neighbor building. The property it sits on is worth only $577,000 an acre. So it's worth like a third less than my property. They've got people down there that remove the snow after every snowstorm. They've got people that do the plantings. In my street, I've got grass growing up on the sidewalk. They plow the snow on the sidewalk, and if I want the snow gone before March when it melts, I've got to move it myself. So, I'm getting a much lower level of service for a much higher valuation, and, that doesn't seem right. And the second thing is, if I compare my property to the property across the street, I've got 11 hundredths of an acre. It's 16 hundredths of an acre. It's assessed at $700 more, even though it's 50% larger. That's the way the city does it. If you look at the assessing standards, you're supposed to consider the value of improvements and fences and stuff like that. They don't do it. They just apply a strict value for the different acreage, which is peanuts. For the extra 5 hundredths of an acre, it's only $700. And they don't, look at the landscaping and stuff. And this is where I'm getting into the structural racism, that people that have, very nice landscaping and a paved driveway and so forth, they don't get assessed any more than if they have, like me, I've got a driveway with muck. My old car with little wheels, I actually had to jack it up to get it out when I got stuck. And my neighbor across the street, that's a 50% bigger lot, he's got a paved driveway. I asked one of the city's former assessors, how come he doesn't have a higher assessment than I do? And they said, having a paved driveway makes the property more valuable, and it costs money to do it, so of course it should have a higher value. But in the city, we're told not to do that. We only use this percentage number. So, and then I have some areas that do not have heat. And you may remember last year there was a commercial building that some areas didn't have heat, so it got a much lower assessment. And so I complained about that. You should reduce my valuation. And they said, no, that's in the depreciation. Well, depreciation is from the initial value. Depreciation is not stuff you never had. It's stuff that declined. And once again, if you look at a commercial property, what do they get for depreciation every year on a building? Is it 5% of it, 2% of it, 1% of it? My depreciation percentage hasn't changed. I'm still having the same depreciation on my property that I did 2 years ago. So, does that mean my property, depreciates over 200 years, 500 years, such that it can't lose 1% in depreciation over 2 years? They're just doing the commercial property entirely different than the residential property, which is one reason the commercial property is getting such a good deal. First off, it's not getting assessed as heavily, and secondly, they can afford to challenge it, whereas an ordinary person can't. So I really think we need to, make sure that the city methods comply with the state regulations and good assessing practices, and not give the commercial people this amazing break, whereas poor homeowners, essentially can do nothing because we can't afford to challenge it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Mr. Swiker? None? Appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Just want to first thank you for moving up the public hearings, because sitting still is not as easy as it used to be for me. Jessica Martin, I'm the Executive Director of In Town Concord. And I just really wanted to attend today to thank the City Council for their continued support of our programs. I've been in town for a 1.5 years now, and we've been really working hard coming out of a pandemic to put on free programming for the community and support the downtown businesses as they all rebound from COVID, and we're really thankful for your continued support. Again, pregnancy, short-winded, you guys bear with me. But I wanted to attend today to give you guys an opportunity if you had any questions about anything, and also just to report on some things that we're working on coming up in 2022, 2023. So one thing I'm really proud of is in fiscal year 2021, 2022, we were able to have all of our slated community events in Concord, and similar organizations like ours throughout New Hampshire were not able to do that. So In-Town has really bounced back in a way that I'm really proud of. We have kept on 2 full-time staff people. We have money, if for any reason something happened, like a pandemic, that we could go back to, and we are debt-free. So really proud of our organization, and that is a large part for the community and your support. Looking forward, we have market days happening. We've moved it back to June, so it's June 23rd through the 25th this year. That was in response to us moving it to August, and the feedback we got from the community was that was not the preferred date. So back to June we go, and we are working with the Capital Center for the Arts this year. We're bringing a nationally known band, Vertical Horizon, to downtown Concord, and that's going to be a free show for the community, and to my knowledge, that's the first time that that has happened. So we're really, really proud, happy to work with them and collaborate on this effort. And some other things that we're working on, we are participating with the Chamber and several city officials and stakeholders on a committee called Destination Downtown, and working to kind of coordinate efforts as far as marketing goes and sponsorship requests. As you know, a lot of nonprofits are asking for sponsorship for things, so we're just trying to streamline some of our efforts with regards to that. We're also getting more involved this year in the Capital Arts Festival, which is the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, the Chamber, Capital Center for the Arts, and us, I believe, are the organizations working on that. And one thing we're trying to do with that, take on as kind of our role in that, is to bring in some of the food trucks. And I know you guys just passed some zoning and some new permitting for that, which is really going to free up and make that more of an opportunity for some of the trucks that might have, or the vendors, the food vendors that might not have participated in the past. We do hear with market days, that it is quite costly for them to participate as far as permitting. So also with regards to that, that's going to be less expensive for some of our vendors for market days too, which is always helpful and helps us attract them. So that's basically it for things I wanted to report on, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has anything.
Those questions, Councilor Credit.
Thank you, Your Honor. Most of all, I just want to congratulate you for all of the connections that you're making in the community. I mean, I need a 1.5 years here, and you're really reaching out, and I hear it in the community, and I wanted to at least acknowledge all the connections that you're making. A new one is coming with Concord Television. We're going to do a TV show called Let's Tell a Ghost Story.
Ooh.
So we'll be downtown to start gathering some footage and stuff like that. And so,
oh, I can't wait to see that.
Yep. So if anybody's got a ghost story, let me know.
That's
Thanks.
going to be a good one.
Ooh.
You got one, don't you?
There's no such thing as ghosts. Okay. Any further questions? Thank you, Jess. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
What's your step?
I thought you were congratulating me on something.
That too.
Anyone else? Come on up. I haven't seen you in about 20 minutes. So it's
Hi, I'm Ellen Groh, and I'm the director of the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness. And so I also, similar to the woman right before me, just wanted to answer any questions you have and say that We truly appreciate the partnership that we have with the city to end homelessness in Concord, and we appreciate that the requested budget increase that we requested was put into the recommended budget. We managed through COVID very well, I would say. We did not have to decrease our capacity at all, and that's in large part because we were able to operate out of the First Church building, which was so much bigger. But it costs significantly more to operate out of that gigantic building that eats oil and gas, or however we're heating it. It's huge operating expenses there. So that's part of the reason for the increase. Besides these emergency services that we're providing, we are really continuing to push on our permanent housing initiatives. We've just bought another property on Pleasant Street that we hope to convert into one-bedroom apartments. So that's our real goal, is permanent housing, and we're continuing to push our efforts to work with the other agencies in town and other, not just nonprofits, but other stakeholders in the city to pin down the number of people suffering from chronic homelessness in the city and really understand their individual barriers so we can collectively figure out solutions for everyone, and so that we can make sure that everyone in Concord has a stable place to call home. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councilor Todd.
Thank you, Your Honor. Not so much a question, just a comment. I was really impressed with the way that the coalition's been handling the permanent housing efforts that you've been making, and the results that you've had have been really great. And,
thank you.
Just a quick note to congratulate you on your upcoming retirement.
Thank you.
And also to thank you for your years of service there. I'm convinced that the coalition's success has had a lot to do with your efforts personally, and I really want to thank you for all that you've done to help for this serious problem we've had in Concord these years.
Thank you very much. And I will be around for a smooth transition. So you get me for you're stuck with me for a little while longer. Any other questions?
I think Councilor Todd summed up our feelings, and we really do appreciate all your efforts.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Welcome.
I'm Terry Page.
And we get to say you really do make the buses run on time.
I do. I try. I try. I'm the Transportation Director for the Community Action Program for Belknap and Merrimack counties. And it's actually in the budget as the Capital Area Transit, but it's Concord Area Transit. So I don't know if we can get that changed at some point. But the official name is Concord Area Transit. And we are in the budget for a slight increase this year. And I also just wanted to say thank you very much for your continued support, and be here for any questions that you might have. I know there was a formal response that I sent back to a suggestion, and I was hoping that that answered any questions you might have, but I'm here to be in person and say, throw them at me if you got them. So.
Anyone? I would just say, first of all, thank you. It was a very detailed response, and it was really helpful. That you were very timely in getting back. Thank you. That's number one. Number two is I really appreciate how responsive you've been to try to make adjustments to the routes and to people's needs as between COVID and just as the community changes and such, and how flexible you've been, and it's that's not easy. And lastly, I think it's important for the community to know, and you can probably help me with this, but the dollars that are in this budget simply really leverage federal dollars.
Yes.
So the dollars that a person in the community might look at this budget and say, this is what this is. No, it's really much, much more, and we are just a small portion of what you were able to do. Is that fair?
Correct. So we can't actually access any of our main funding source, which there are two FTA funding sources, 5311, which is for the main Concord Area Transit service that we run. And then there's the 5310 programs, which are the more general, very rural systems that we run, which include the volunteer driver program, which helps folks who have medical appointments outside of the Concord area. So we will take folks using a volunteer system to use their personal vehicles to take folks to Boston, to Lebanon, to any of the other places that they need to go. And we can't draw any of those funds down unless we have local match. So the money that Concord and you guys have so generously given us over the years is specific to that. It helps us pull those federal funds down so that we can do what we need to do to keep people moving in the city. So without that local match, we are literally not moving the buses. So we have to have that in order to get those federal funds down to be able to make it all work. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything you do.
You're welcome, and thank you all. I really appreciate all that you do to support us. It's been a really nice partnership the last few years, and I appreciate it. So, thanks.
Who else? Anybody else want to? Okay, we'll close the public hearing at that time on this portion, and Mr. Manager, welcome back. Shall we talk fire?
Please.
Please or please?
Police is
Police, I
next.
think.
Police. Unless you want to change it,
We
Your
could
Honor.
do that.
It's okay.
Where do you want to go? I was trying to see if I could make JT sit here a little longer. That's what
He never sits anywhere for any length of time. So you want to be on, police department is next, public safety. You want to start with item number 5. And you want to be on page 104. Revenues budget to budget are down $22,000 or 3.5%. $80,000 decrease for parking penalties, which will be recorded in the parking budget, and an offsetting transfer from parking to general fund. There's a $40,000 increase for special duty services. There's a $5,000 increase for cruiser rental fees. There's a $7,000 increase for school district payments. Expenses budget to budget are up $646,000 or 4.5%. There are $16,600 in computer crimes software licensing. Computer crimes training is up $15,000. Police Academy is up $6,000. Motorcycle instructor training is up $6,200. Motorcycle radar is up $2,500. Motorola service agreement increases by $16,000. De-escalation equipment is up by $2,400. Dispatch stipend and position upgrade is up $7,700. The TASER program is up $33,000. The general supplies and equipment of overall increased costs and regular wages and benefits. I want to reiterate again that this budget puts additional emphasis on public safety and support for resources, especially investigations of crime against the city's most vulnerable populations, and continued support for non-lethal options when dealing with offenders. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Good questions. That's great.
Thank you, Your Honor. In the Appendix B, which we always go to see what the departments had asked for and then is taken out of the budget, there was a request for an additional 4 police officers. Can you talk to why it is that we're not making that recommendation when we are seeing an increased call to service?
It's been relatively recent situation where we've actually been very close to full staffing. So I would like to see how that works first before we add any additional staff. But that's secondary to the first answer. And the first answer is because we're adding 4 additional firefighter, paramedic positions. And it's my thought that the community can only afford so much of an increase in the tax rate.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Can we, Chief, why don't you come on up?
I have one after you.
Okay, go ahead. Council Keach.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just have one question about the special duty services. As of late, I've seen a lot of out-of-town detail officers here. So does that Does that number indicate what the city nets, exclusive of what goes to out of town, or is that inclusive?
This is all city, so when an out-of-town officer works in Concord, they bill that contractor direct, so it's, we're not the middleman on that one.
Thank you.
I just want to, anyone else want to go? I just want to follow up on Councilor Kretovik's question. I appreciate the manager's response. I think that, we asked the manager to bring us a budget that he thought was responsible, and he did. And then it's our job to take a look at that and to
Correct him. I think he's away.
So, I'm looking to just calls for service, and obviously it's dramatically increasing each year. We just got our new census. Our population has increased. We are seeing growth in all different sectors, and we still have the same number of officers on the street that when you started your career here, after graduating cum laude, I think, at UNH, right?
Close.
Yeah. So I mean, I have asked this question of every chief who sat at your desk. Is it time to add new officers? And you were the first chief to actually say publicly, yes, we need new officers. So what would it mean to the department to have additional staffing in terms of resources in the department? What would it mean to the community? What would it mean to the department? How could we then look at the terms of service that the people get and the level of service?
Thank you for the question. I think that, we've talked for a number of years that the model that we're using on patrol is relatively the same as it's been for 3 decades, right? So during the day, you only have 8 or 9 police officers patrolling the city of Concord. That's not changed in 33 years. What the calls for service are increasing coming out of COVID, but one of the things that's really apparent to me is the complexity of the cases that we're dealing with. These aren't cases that we can handle in a matter of an hour. These are extensive cases. I talk about when I started in 1989, we did not have a computer crime unit. That just evolved over time. So you actually have 3 detectives work. That's all they do, and they're still buried. Having additional officers allows me to, number one, get additional officers on the street when needed, but it also allows me to begin succession-type planning. One of the things that we're hoping to do this summer is take a patrol officer and give them an internship opportunity for the summer so that they can learn the complexities of the criminal computer crimes unit. Learn how to do some of that type of investigative work. We also take a police officer off the street to put them in our property room so that they can really have a full-scale knowledge of what actually happens to evidence behind the wall, and that they're able to bring that knowledge back to patrol eventually. We did put in for 4 officers. It comes at about $399,000. I do have a limited time offer that we can drop that to $233,000.
Sold.
And that would
I have always wanted to do that at 25 years.
I would anticipate if we had the opportunity, we've filled some of the vacancies that we're filling right now this summer, that I would be looking to put on more people come December if I was at full staff. So that would be a 7-month program.
Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I think when you were here, I want to say it was 2 years ago, the big focus was on filling vacant positions. So I wanted to know, my assumption is that you're doing better on that because we haven't heard too much about that recently, but can you speak a little bit to your efforts to recruit and retain officers?
Yeah, so at one point we were actually, the council has us at 88 sworn police officers. At one point in time we actually had 89 on payroll. Currently, we've had a number of retirements this calendar year so far. Another one coming up next week. Deputy Chief Taylor is retiring next Tuesday. So with his departure, we'll be down 5 positions. We just extended a job offer to a certified police officer who's going to start in June, so that would be 4 vacancies. And we're looking to get at least 2, if not 3, into the August Police Academy. So we're getting close again.
Follow up. So looking at the number in Appendix B that you had for 4 officers, my immediate reaction is that seemed low for 4 officers. So what was your expectation as to where these officers would come in? And second, does that include benefits in that number?
It does. So they would come in, you know, as far as the wages are concerned, at step 1 on the pay scale. But remember that a police officer that comes in is with us for about 6 to 9 weeks before they go to the police academy. They're at the police academy for another 16 weeks. And then when they come out, they're another 16 weeks of field training. So it's a long journey before they're even doing anything for the city of Concord.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate Councilor Fennessy talking about the conversation we were having 2 years ago. Last year, the conversation that we were having was about fatigue and compassion fatigue within the police department because of the type of calls that they were responding to during a pandemic, elevated concern for their own safety, plus what they're dealing with on the streets of Concord. The drug use, the domestic violence, the number of different cases that come before our prosecutors that our police department deal with. I'm glad to see that what you're doing is giving some of the officers an opportunity to be off that and working in the computer and crime unit and going into property. For me, I looked at this request as this was a possibility to help, again, relieve some of that compassion fatigue that we might be seeing in our officers. Is that still occurring, that we're seeing that the type of cases our patrolmen are seeing, or patrol officers?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So that is still a problematic issue in public safety. You know, I think we've also done a pretty good job internally as a department in embracing the critical incident stress management program that we have. And we've done a number of debriefings with our officers over the last couple of years on serious incidents. We've also brought in 2 police chaplains that are at the police department on a weekly basis, getting to know the police officers. And so a lot of our training does focus around officer health and wellness.
Thank you.
Thanks, Your Honor. Chief, how confident are you that if you had extra positions to fill, additional positions to fill, that you'd be able to fill them, given our history of the challenges that we've faced in filling positions?
Well, it's hiring police officers is a problem across the country. We do a pretty good job. We've changed the way we hire people or interview people. As soon as their applications come in, we jump right away, and it's almost a one-on-one recruitment at that point. So I am confident that as long as we stick to that program and the applications still come in, that we're going to be successful.
Thank you.
How often do you have to kind of triage calls that come in to dispatch because you just don't have enough bodies to actually cover all the incidents that are going on throughout the city?
It's a daily occurrence. You know, the way our computer screen will be is that it's all color-coded, so every officer that's on patrol is listed. If they're green, means that they're available. If they're yellow, that means they're on their way to a call. If it's red, it means that they're at a call. And I have it on my desk every day, and I just glance over, and it's always red.
I guess the reason my question is, you know, we had a conversation on our household. This is the type of stuff we talk about, I guess. But, you know, it's about what is the level of expectation that citizens of Concord have in terms of response from the police department. And, you know, when I talk to the person who lives in Ward 10 on Mountain Road or Shaker Road, or I talk to the person who lives in Ward 1 who lives on Community Drive, and when they're complaining about the speed at which traffic is flying down their streets, potentially endangering those folks that are going to the school or to the other school, you know, that's the most important thing to them at that particular moment, because that's what's affecting their particular life. Meanwhile, you're being pulled to a situation where you know, you may have a domestic violence situation. You may have you know, a fight in whatever it is, something that is more imminent in danger and such. They're all important. But we here, I think I can speak for most, I mean, I can speak for myself, that, you know, sometimes it's that quality of life issue, which, you know, there's an expectation that a police officer is going to come and to address them, and they're not always able to get that because you just don't have the bodies. Is that a fair kind of assessment? I mean,
Yeah, and so that's another thing that we can possibly do if we have extra personnel is that we can dedicate a traffic resource to patrol, meaning that this officer's job is traffic enforcement and to handle all of those calls that come in and speak with the residents and find out the times, and so that officer can be in those areas throughout the course of the day. You know, if you look like at Mountain Road up by the Country Club, which is historically people speed up there, by the way, but that officer that covers Mountain Road by Shaker Road and towards the golf course also covers Loudon Road. So they're generally drawn to Loudon Road and the East Side Drive in the mall area versus having an opportunity to patrol up that way.
Anything else? Okay.
I do have other things too.
What's that?
Do have some other things.
Go down the list, he has a lot about.
I have a whole list.
That I didn't put in the budget, so.
I only looked at the first page. I didn't look at this page. Go ahead if you want.
Oh, okay. So a couple of these are capital items that I'm just asking for some consideration for the.
You can come back for the capital.
I will be back.
Okay. All right.
So, do you want me to address it at the capital meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be helpful. We'll have it in front of us then, sir.
Then I have nothing else.
He rests.
Please.
Just to follow up on that last point that the mayor was making, I guess it was last summer into the fall, we had a number of parking forums in the neighborhood that were led by Councilor Champlin. And some of the feedback that we received was to this point that the mayor was raising, where people were having issues with cars blocking driveways or, you know, being all over the place, and feeling like when they called the police department, there wasn't any follow-up, or if they did show up, cars weren't being ticketed, and there was a level of frustration. It was mostly in, I think, Ward 6 was who we were dealing with, but I don't know if that's something that you have heard as well. It was certainly the feedback that we got at some of these meetings. And I understand, obviously, you have to deal with the most urgent and pressing issue, and you have to kind of pick and choose order of priority. But we certainly got the feedback that a lot of citizens were kind of frustrated that they weren't getting their quality of life issues addressed.
Yeah. So we've heard some of those complaints in the past. I think a parking issue is generally a low-level thing for a patrol officer to handle. And patrol officers, I don't want to speak for all of them, they generally look at a parking situation as something that they're going to look to mediate it rather than issuing a ticket. You know, the parking enforcement officers would issue the ticket. So, but those are conversations I can have with Deputy Chief Smagul and the watch commanders to see if we can handle those
If I could add, those are addressed if you, on that same section right after police, there's a section on parking for the parking officer equipment tech positions, and those are all funded. So if you fund those, then you're addressing exactly that question.
But it's, I think that's just a portion of it. So I'll give you another example. So, last week there was a gentleman called me because there was a dog bite. All right, his dog was attacked and he was bitten. I've had a young family whose their child lost their bike off their porch that was stolen. Even though they got the Ring doorbell, and it's just hard to solve. And y'all did respond, but it just takes time because there's only so many of you. There's only so many hours a day, and there's as you said, it's all red. So it's not just parking. And I appreciate that you're dealing with the parking issue, but it's some of those things that I think you described maybe not be imminent danger, perhaps.
Yeah, and I do some public speaking now and again, and I tell people that this is one of the biggest complaints that I get when people get a hold of me is that they're not complaining about what the police officer did or didn't do or said or didn't say. They're complaining about how long it took the police officer to get there.
And that's bodies, right?
Yep.
Council Keach.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, can you refresh me and the public as to where we are with school resource officers? Now more than ever, I think people want to know, are there police officers in the high schools or not? And I understand a function of that is the willingness of the school to participate in the program.
So the Merrimack Valley Middle School has a SRO. The Merrimack Valley High School has a full-time SRO. Concord High School has a full-time SRO, and that SRO is funded for next year as well by the school board.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Seeing none, thank you, really appreciate it. Want to do police and fire together, or you want to, let's just do police?
Yeah, do them together.
Yeah. Okay.
Either way, I can get up.
How many people here want to testify on police?
Say that again?
Do you want to testify on the police budget? Anybody?
I would certainly like to make a comment.
Sure. Let's open up the public hearing on the police budget, and away you can go home if you wish.
You can save the seat here, like.
Oh,
yes, I can see you.
Just don't touch his notebook.
Welcome, good evening.
Hi, I'm Pat Pike from Pennacook, and I would be in favor of adding 4 more police. And certainly, while to the city manager's comment about trying not to overwhelm the budget, we can't just keep deferring things forever and ever, because when the tragedy happens, everyone's going to be pointing. And the key is not having tragedies happen. So to the extent that the police officers will feel supported, they're not overwhelmed, they're not overworked, they can approach each incident clear mind and not having worked 80 hours. We need to have appropriate number of police on our city. If it's been, 30 years, we haven't added any more capacity? That seems rather ridiculous to me. So we certainly added a lot more people to the area. So I'd be in favor of adding 4 and perhaps adding more in successive years. I'd like to hear of a plan over 6 or 8 years, because you're going to have retirements. And so you may need to really reboot the department with new people. So thank you.
Before we go, anybody have any questions? Seeing none? I'm going to ask you a favor before you go, though. But, so this person, Sue, sorry, so she takes our notes. And my goal, one of the most important goals, is to keep Sue happy. And she asked if you could just give her your name. There's a sheet over there. If you came to testify on a sheet, that'd be really helpful.
Sure.
She'll get the spelling correct.
Thanks. Anybody else want to testify on the police department budget? Anyone? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on the police department budget. Mr. Manager.
The next section is the fire department, and that's item number 6 on your agenda. So the fire department budget, item number 6, you want to be on page 111. Those attachments. Previous budget to budget are, revenue budget to budget are up $154,000 or 5%, mainly due to an increase in the ambulance charges. Expenses budget to budget are up $1.3 million or 8.4%. A major part of this budget is wages and benefits for the addition of 4 paramedics to staff the new ambulance, overtime, and the advanced EMT position upgrades. And of course, this does not include any capital associated with the acquisition of an additional ambulance. I'm also adding funding for the fire records management software at $17,000. Facility maintenance at headquarters and fire stations for $25,000. Advanced EMT tuition for $4,000. A ventilator service contract for $3,000. Fire alarm and traffic light temporary labor support for $9,700. And the remainder of this increase is for wages and benefit changes. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Who's question for the manager? Nothing? Wow, okay. Council Pierce.
So just to review the plan for if we just do decide to buy a new ambulance and staff it, could you go through the timeframes involved with training and acquiring the ambulance and when there'll be an ambulance at Manor Station?
Certainly. So you'll recall at the initial presentation, you have the 2 ambulances in reserve right now that are in relatively good condition, and they previously were frontline. We would bring one of those up as soon as we had enough staffing to staff it. The fire department is out right now for to fill 1 paramedic position because we have a vacancy, and I've given the interim chief the authority, depending on what happens with the budget as we go forward, to plan on hiring 5 positions, because if you find that talent available, and it's probably one of the most difficult positions. And if you thought hiring a police officer was difficult, a paramedic is doubly difficult, just because of the skill set involved. So you would bring those people on. The request in the budget, the request from the fire department was for 6 months of funding, so that would start in January. I've actually put in funding for 9 months of funding, so that would start in September. But my recommendation to you is that if they can actually find those paramedics, that we staff the ambulance immediately, and then I would be tasked myself with trying to make that work in the existing budget, whatever the budget is that you approve. So we would then order, if you approve this, we would then order a new ambulance, an additional ambulance, and the delivery time on that I've been told is about anywhere between 12 and 18 months for that. Closer to 18 months is likely. So we wouldn't want to wait for that, so that's why we'd use the reserve. The difficulty in that is you'd have now 4 frontline and 1 in reserve, and there are times when you've had to have those 2 reserves available. But that's, to me, if the idea is to provide the service as quick as we can for the community, it makes sense to bring that reserve forward.
Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
I think Council Fancy and Council Todd.
Just a quick question. I know I should probably know what this means, but what's 20 for 20 staffing overtime?
So that actually have the hire enough people to fill all the positions out there. So they need 20 people, 20 positions filled to be able to have everything operational that they want operational.
Okay.
You approved that already. You approved that during the year, but remember, you did that under fund balance. Now you're budgeting for it, which is why you're having to raise the additional taxes for it. You cannot count on that there'll be enough surplus in next year's budget to actually cover that cost.
So follow up on that, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought we were doing that in lieu of ordering the new ambulance. Does the new ambulance not address some of that overtime?
It's part of it. So if you think about, there's really 3 pieces in the process, the steps that we talked about. The first was improving and increasing the amount of service that people realize when they're in the back of the ambulance. So that was to go from the EMT positions to the advanced EMT positions. You funded that earlier in the year. The next one was to take the ambulance, essentially move it to Central, and then have a paramedic on the engine that's up in Manor. There's additional costs associated with that. That was all overtime costs. You funded that, again, under fund balance. So if you think about how this works, really, then you have to also hire 4 additional paramedics to make this whole thing work. So all those 3 steps are now funded in the fiscal year 23 budget. So you funded them under fund balance, essentially savings that we're able to achieve in other parts of the budget and the fire department budget, and now you're actually going to budget for them, which is why you have this. And again, even just for 9 months of funding, that's the 1.8% tax rate increase just associated with that. When you do it for a full year, it's really about a 2% increase, 2.1.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to thank my colleague, Councilor Pierce, for his question. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. You said that, Mr. Manager, using the backup ambulance, it's not ideal to bring that online as the 4th, but that's our best option for now. And I'm assuming that would be able to do that for the entirety of the time it takes to order the new ambulance.
That's correct.
Follow-up. Do we have, if that situation caused any issues in terms of, the calls delayed because of the fact that we had issues that we weren't able to bring that second backup ambulance on because it's going to be used more full-time. We won't have 2 backups any longer. Do you have anything in mind, or does the fire department, in terms of an alternate plan that we could implement so that you would be able to alleviate that?
Well, you'll also see when you, as far as the general services budget, there's been an increase in parts and labor and for work. So the idea would be that we would, and we do have people who are specially trained at general services to work on fire equipment. So that's something that we want to do. So I'm confident that, we would make it work with the existing vehicles we have. But I would like to get back as soon as we can to having 4 frontline and 2 reserve. So you'd have a total of 6 instead of 5.
Right. One more follow-up, Your Honor. With this plan, what do you think would be the earliest time that folks could expect an ambulance to return to Manor then?
I think the pinch point is the hiring the 4 paramedics, getting them trained, make sure that everybody's certified and that we're comfortable with them being available. So we might want to ask the acting chief, the interim chief, and put him on the spot. What the ribbon cutting date is on this, but I think John is just the perfect person to make this work. Not to answer it, to make it work.
Luckily, he's sneaking up behind you.
I'll take the responsibility.
Good evening, Chief. Good evening. Thank you for having me. The question, I believe, is when would be able to have that in service if we were given. So if we were allowed to start on July 1, if you approve this, we really believe that within 10 to 12 weeks, conservatively, that we would be able to do that. And the reason for that is there's amount of time, as the city manager said, we do have an open hiring right now. We actually interviewed 2 people today for that. So we do have some interest, which is a positive sign. Once we do our interviews, they go through some other processes, some other interviews. We have the background checks and all of that part. Then once we find the candidates, then they're obviously going to need to give their employer a couple of weeks. And once they are ours, we normally will put them through a 2-week recruit school, so they're not on the trucks. We have to put them through, and that requires a lot of coordination and some other people to come in. When we do those, we do some live burns. We have to hire people in for safety. Once they go to that, they go to their shift, but they're not what we call counted in staffing at that point, because now they need to learn their shift. We have to put them through some other tests as well. That takes at least a week, if not a couple weeks. And then because these are paramedics, we have an additional step because we need to acclimate them to Concord Hospital's policies and procedures, the way we do things within our EMS protocols, and that is going to take another couple of weeks. So we anticipate that it will take up to 3 months, but we're going to try to get that done a couple of weeks prior to that if possible. And we do think that there is the talent and the interest out there. If you're willing to put this forward, we do believe that we will be able to fill these spots at this point. Thank you.
Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, thank you so much for providing confidence for this area of the city, wards 1, 2, and 3, that really do have manor station that typically will respond to issues in our community. I did want to just take a moment for the community recognize that we're going to crest 10,000 calls is anticipated for next year.
Yes.
That is an average of 27 calls per day, and that's not just for ambulance service. That is really for our fire department in response to calls, if we're just looking at an average.
Correct.
I think that public safety overall, when our police department is looking at 54,000 calls on an average year or anticipated for the year, and over 10,000 for our fire department, the community needs to be aware that the reason we want to add this ambulance and service, extending the number of fire department members is significant because of the changes that we've seen over the years and the type of responses that we have. So I appreciate the work of the fire department and everything that you're doing. We would like that ambulance back at Manor Road as soon as possible.
I do as well.
I don't want to speak for you, but I think
Just go this way.
I'm kind of in agreement, yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, this is down in the weeds a little bit, but I just have a question about the rapid recall policy.
Okay.
Could you explain that, how that works when our folks go out of town, when they're requested, and this is all predicated on the overtime costs involved in that, and is that justifiable to the taxpayers of Concord?
So you're asking me to clarify what the rapid recall policy?
Well, I would ask you to first explain it, and then how do you justify the overtime to the taxpayers of Concord? When we're essentially providing coverage for out-of-town folks, subsidizing their operation, I would put it that way.
If we are doing a rapid recall, we bring people back on either a rapid or a staffing recall. Sometimes it's to put an additional piece in, and then sometimes it's if we have a critical staffing need. But if we're putting an additional truck on, generally it's going to be we have something that we're assisting with that's going to be long-term. Every time we have a piece go out, we don't do additional recall.
And just to clarify, I'm asking specifically when our folks go out of town. I mean, internally, I understand why rapid recall might be necessary if there's a major event or whatever, but if our folks are going out of town and that initiates a rapid recall, that's the piece that I struggle with a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, so we do. So if we have the pieces that are out of the city, we also want to make sure, it's our priority to make sure that the city is covered. In return, those outside agencies are providing that same service. If we have a structure fire, even though we are a larger department, we are still very reliant on those outside towns to come in to help us put our fires out. So it's part of the mutual aid agreement. So what we get that back is when we do have emergencies in the city, we have enough staffing through our mutual aid system to help us mitigate those quickly.
Follow up, Your Honor. So would you characterize the arrangement as equitable?
I believe right now it is, if we look at the total net, it is equitable. Sometimes for EMS, we are bigger. We give more to certain departments, and then we take more from certain departments. But overall,
thank you.
I would say it is.
So to follow up on that, so
Yes,
what town do we get more services from than we give?
For are we EMS or so right now?
You were doing it on the collective, so.
Yep. Bo, right now, 10% of Bo's total run volume is coming into our city and handling the mutual aid calls we cannot.
And what towns do we provide more service to than they give to us?
That would be out in, so basically covering Pennacook Rescue, so the Boscawen, as well as probably Pembroke, without looking right at my notes.
Just those two towns?
Those are our highest consumers.
So nothing to Canterbury, nothing to Andover,
Pennacook
nothing to
Rescue also
Hopkinton, nothing to...
Yeah, Pennacook Rescue covers Canterbury.
Pennacook Rescue covers Canterbury as well.
So I was looking for the towns, because they're the ones who are appropriating the money.
Yeah, so our mutual aid given, we're providing mutual aid to Allenstown, Boscawen, Bow, Canterbury, Chichester, Dunbarton, Henniker, Loudon, Pembroke, Hooksett, Northborough, Pittsfield, and Salisbury. Some of those are one-offs, some of those, the highest consumer, Pembroke for EMS.
So would you believe that we often get calls from people who live in the city wondering why they see a Concord member of your department, our department, in Henniker, that's why I want you to go through the towns, so people understand that
Yes.
we do provide for a much greater piece.
Yes, we do.
Council Chamberlain.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, specifically for ambulance service, what's the ideal response time?
So the ideal response time, and what I would have to do is quote industry standard. And I will clarify that these are not standards that have necessarily been adopted by the city of Concord, but NFPA 1710 dictates the response standards for EMS and fire for career fire departments. And those standards specific to EMS calls say, and I'll simplify this, they break it down a little bit, but they say within 5 minutes we should have a basic life support crew on scene, and within 9 minutes we should have an advanced life support crew on scene, to simplify that.
And how are we doing against that measure?
Right now, with moving the ambulance from the Manor Station to Central, in Central, in the Heights, and the Broadways district, we are mostly meeting that. The Manor right now, we are not.
Follow up, Your Honor. So how frequently, percentage-wise or however you could answer the question, do ambulances roll from a station in response to a call?
Let me make sure that I'm correctly interpreting your question. Are you asking how often are they in quarters when they receive the call?
Yes, I am.
I can't give a specific percentage, but they are very often not. Either they're on the road doing another call, they are out doing training, they are doing driver training, any number of things. But
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it is probably less than the general public would think, although we do try to keep them in district in their stations as much as we can. We do recognize that need.
Thank you. Follow up. So how often are they likely to be deployed from the hospital? Say when they've released a patient and they get a call.
It happens very often.
Very often they're
It
leaving
happens
from
often.
the hospital.
It
Okay.
does.
And follow up.
Just keep going.
I'll just keep going. All right. Thank you. So very often leaving from the hospital. So let's say I have an ambulance that is stationed at McKee Square, all right, and they are discharging a patient at the hospital, and there's a call for service on the Heights.
Okay.
Do you wait for the Heights ambulance to respond to that?
No. No.
Do you wait for the next available ambulance to respond to that?
So what will happen if there is Concord ambulances available in the city, normally the district ambulance will be dispatched. However, if there is an out-of-district ambulance that is actually closer, our crews are very good about we're closer, we'll take it.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. Do you have a sense of like how many of our calls are for drug overdoses? Is it a high percentage or is it a low percentage?
It waxes and wanes. For specifically drug overdoses, I would have to run that. I don't have an exact number for you.
And any idea of like what percentage is homeless, calls to the homeless camps and?
To the homeless camps, we do have, and we were collecting some data on what we call the homeless nexus. We did actually recently take a look at that data, and it seems that the reporting was somewhat inconsistent, but we have had several calls. It is.
But it's more several, it's not like massive,
It's several, yes. It is not the majority of the calls.
All right, thank you. And the last question. I've recently read online that the modern ambulance is essentially a rolling emergency room, and that once a patient is in the ambulance, they're just as good as being in the hospital. Is that accurate?
It depends on the call. There are calls that we can mitigate the emergency and give definitive or nearly definitive care. Those are sometimes few and far between: severe allergic reactions, anaphylaxis, choking. But there are other types of calls where our goal is to get on scene, get the patient stabilized, physically stabilized, moved into our ambulance, and move quickly and do anything that we do, whether that's medical procedures and medications, while we are moving down the road. Things like stroke, heart attacks, anything, major trauma where the surgical intervention is that final definitive treatment. Time is a big factor, and we do not have the ability to finally fix those problems.
Super. Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Honor.
Sure.
Councilor Batson.
One of the questions that I'm thinking about, since we're talking about increases in ambulance and you've been discussing the reserves, so you typically have 2 reserves for ambulance, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how many reserves do you have for engines?
For engines, we have engine 3 and engine 6, so we have 2 engines on reserve.
In reserve, okay.
In reserve, yes.
And now that you're going to be adding, if we choose to add a new ambulance, would the reserves need to increase, or is 2 going to be sufficient for the number of ambulances that are online?
Gut feeling is it should be adequate. I could also defer that to the fleet manager. And if I may take a minute to address a question by Councilor Pearson, it's related to the question you had. We do have, as part of our last fiscal year, we did order 2 ambulances, and they may be in as early as October. And at that point, whenever those happen to come in, we do have the option to potentially not trade them in. So we may have some newer ambulances available to help with this problem. And then our next challenge will be where to house that additional ambulance.
Okay, thank you.
They don't really have a lot of trade-in value after we're getting rid of them. So if they're still in good condition, it would be worth the while to keep one.
I don't know. Councilor Fennessy collects them, so you.
Yeah, but those are this big.
Anyone else? So, I'm sorry, Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Your Honor. Has there ever been a case where a patient has passed away on the ride to the ambulance after they have been stabilized?
Your question is, do patients pass away in the back of our ambulance once they've been stabilized? Unfortunately, that does happen in all systems.
Has that happened since you've been here in Concord?
Oh, yes.
I would imagine that happens almost every day.
Not in every day, but it is, I would say it's not, maybe not common, but it is several times a year, despite best efforts.
We have a good batting average. We'd make the Hall of Fame, right? We're over 500. Anyone else? So Chief, your department in the past used to provide the council and the community a whole lot more data when it came to service indicators, and we're now down to 6 categories that are very generalized and really don't paint much of a picture of what's going on in the department. I'd like you to go back to, if you'd be willing, I'd like you to go back to Mr. Manager, if you would instruct.
I'm listening.
To go back to all the indicators that we had in the past, and I'd like to see the numbers for all those. Specifically, I want to know how many fires are there? What are your calls for suppression versus ambulatory? I think that's really important to the community. Why are we making investments in engines? You're going to come to us during the capital budget, and you're going to be looking for a new ladder truck.
Correct.
Why on earth would you need that when all of the discussion that we've had is demand for services ambulatory? You've just told us tonight that if I heard you correctly, that the mutual aid is really primarily based on ambulatory. So what are the calls for services? Do we have fires anymore?
Yes, we do. And the difference is when we mutual aid is single units. When we're talking about fires, we're talking about several different towns coming in.
But some of the things you do provide, I was really kind of taken back a little bit. You only anticipate, last year you did 15 hours and next year 20 hours of public education regarding, I'm assuming, fire safety. That's next to nothing. I mean, why do we not do more preventive work with the community?
That type of education is within our fire prevention office. We have 2 people right now in there, the fire marshal and assistant fire marshal. I believe prior to my employment with the city, there was a public education position. I don't know if it was full or part-time.
So we don't do any more outreach to the community at all?
We do outreach in terms of Fire Prevention Week. The on-duty crews will go to schools as long as call volume will allow. A lot of that fire prevention are, I would have to look, but I believe they're car seat inspections. We do have one person that is a certified car installation technician still. And unfortunately, right now, it's just because we don't have the bandwidth to do that. It's personnel driven.
How about, can you explain to me, what role do you play in the community development department? One of the most important things to me, and is always listed as a priority for the council, is economic development. If we can't add tax base, we can't afford to bring on new ambulances, new personnel, et cetera. And you play a critical role, I believe, in that community development process. What role do you play? Do you participate? We have housing is obviously probably one of the biggest statewide issues that we have, and in this community is no different. Do you play a role in that?
In the 8 weeks I've been in this position, unfortunately not yet, but that is something that we do plan on. I know the fire marshal does go regularly to meetings, and I'm not sure with the previous chiefs, unfortunately, how.
Yeah. So the fire department participates on a regular basis on the development team, so meeting with developers very early in the process and making sure that they understand what our expectations are and design requirements are, and so there's no surprises down the line. So whether the layout of hydrants or whether it's the building requirements and whatnot.
So how active, so after that initial meeting, how active is the department in the development process? In other words, do we wait to be called by the developer to go out and do the inspection? Because obviously there's going to be point in times when, during the construction process, in which are we more proactive about that, or are we simply reactionary?
I could call the community development. Do you have somebody in your staff, or I could call Carlos?
Unfortunately, the fire marshal is away on training, but we are initially part of the initial plan reviews. But
good evening, Your Honor, members of council. So, in response to your question, as the manager mentioned, the fire marshal is actually at every development team meeting. We meet every Thursday morning. It provides all the comments, response to people, follows up. Also, there's some developers that or property owners that come through those meetings, and some are more sophisticated in terms of development, others are less. And so he's actually made appointments with people to follow up when his schedule allows in the field.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Rice-Hawkins.
Thank you. Just following, sorry, I've got allergies. My voice is very low. Following up on the question the mayor asked about the public education, we had somewhat recently a grant-funded position for that, I thought.
Our recent grant-funded position, would you be the Project First?
Yes, I think that
So,
was that, yeah.
yes, Project First was part of a SAMHSA grant that was providing some education surrounding opioid and some expanded substance use, and actually did branch out and do some homeless outreach as well for us while he was here.
So I one last one. So Councilor Champlin asked this, and I'm going to try a different way. Could you talk a little bit about your department's interaction with the homeless community, and how does that affect your demand, your service calls and demand for service and such?
Our interactions right now with the homeless after the Project First director left, I would have to say is reactionary at this point. We are not out like we were going into the camps providing education, and one of the things he was doing is also acting as a gateway to different services within. Right now, our experience with them, with the homeless community, other than a little bit of outreach I've had a chance to do, is reactionary, is going to the calls and educating people as we can while we have them either in the back of the ambulance or on scene if they choose not to go to the hospital.
Okay. Thank you. Last chance. Councilor Champlin.
Comment rather than question. Chief, thanks for doing this job. Thanks for stepping into the interim role. I know that you've been grilled today, but we appreciate it. We appreciate the job you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We were easy.
We were easy.
now.
You were kind of.
Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Since we're waiting for you to go back, Mr. Cantor, do you have anything you want to share with us? Just open the public hearing, and you can tell us about being a dad, I think. That's what I'm looking at.
Congratulations, sir.
Cheers. So this time, I'll open the public hearing, and welcome. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
When's the last time you got some sleep?
Look at his eyes.
Still haven't got much sleep. Yeah, she's a week old today. It's been a lot of my time, and it's an exciting new challenge. I'll show photos afterwards, but thank you for that.
Exciting new challenge. That is precious. That is just precious.
We'll be saying that for the next 20-something years.
Yeah.
Wait till she's a teenager. We'll be saying the same thing.
Sure, I've got plenty of things to learn as she continues to grow, but appreciate the support. On behalf of the firefighters, the men and women that I work with that are out on the streets doing this day in and day out, I know it's been a long time that we've gotten to the point where we've been trying to advocate and say, hey, we need help on the streets. We don't have enough of the resources to really hold up and own up to being the best fire department that you have in New Hampshire, the best fire department that a community could ask for. And to finally see that it's made itself into the budget this year. I know, excuse me if I'm losing my voice, kind of that lack of sleep thing, I'm trying to recoup and get my body back to square one. It's going to mean so much for the brothers and sisters that I work with to be able to see some relief, to be able to not see calls go to the wayside, whether we're stuck at the hospital waiting to take in the next call, or we're on a fire emergency or a motor vehicle accident. I mean, yes, there's been a primary focus on EMS, which globally all fire departments are dealing a lot with, but that doesn't mean other parts of the job have kind of evaporated or diminished, because they haven't. In a way, they've become more complex over time. We do a lot of less actual building fires, absolutely. We might not be able to justify that, but the fires evolve so much quicker now. Building construction is almost cheaper, poorly made. It goes faster, and a lot of the hazards that we have in the city hasn't changed, whether it be large buildings in the downtown area, heavily densely populated areas where time is of the essence, that we need people to be able to get into those buildings, do searches, put the fires out, protect further property in the areas. So although those numbers might be dwindling and the data can show that, none of that, it doesn't decrease a priority. I know medical, of course, is the hot button because we're doing so much of it, and we need to be able to handle more of those calls, which a fourth ambulance would be incredibly helpful, but we also need to be prepared for everything else that we see. And I want to say thank you for putting this on your radar, hopefully seeing it through in the budget process that we get this staffing. It's going to continue to bring this fire department further. Appreciate your time.
Any questions? Councilor Craig?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a comment. I want to acknowledge and appreciate what you've done educating the council over this past year, because we know about the elevated calls, but it's service calls. We don't know the details of it. And you have provided so much insight to what our fire department is doing on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, with the training and everything that is an expectation of the job. And having that knowledge as a counselor, and now this is my 8th year, this has probably been the most education I've ever had about our fire department, and I appreciate that, and I hope it continues. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Anyone else? Questions?
I
Councilor
just
Madsen?
wanted to
and Mayor Pro Tem.
follow up for, I think, probably the public as well, that you've talked to us before about the differences in how the calls are coming in, and we were talking about how it comes into the Concord Hospital, and how long are you there now, and what is that like? You can't hand the person off to Concord if they don't have the room for them, or how does that work?
Right, so unfortunately, I'd say things are so multifactorial to trying to figure out where is it that can flex to improve the overall problem that we have. What happens is a lot of times at the hospital, there's no steadfast reason to why we might be there an extended time. The ambulance might be out of service. It all depends on what type of patient acuity we have brought in. So there's times that we can go right to a waiting room if someone's low acute and the emergency department is already packed to the gills. That might be quick because it can be an easy handoff, and that's an appropriate place for them to start, and we can go back in service. You get to a gray area where someone's sick enough that they shouldn't be in the waiting room, but they're not acute enough that they will severely juggle things around in the emergency department to give us a room. So those are the times that are really hurtful, because we'll be staged in the hallways for anywhere probably routinely 10-15 minutes from the time we arrive at the hospital to anecdotally we clear and are available for that next call. And we've seen some of our outlying fringes have gone up to an hour that we're just waiting. We're still responsible for these patients. We can't go anywhere, and that whole crew is not available for city services. And then obviously with the highest acute patients, I'd say Concord Hospital is pretty good at getting us in and out. But those calls also hold us up because we have to either finish our reports, we have to restock, we got to go to the pharmacy to get other medications, we got a decon, crews need a decon depending on if it was a COVID-related call. I mean, there's so many things that come to create that, how quickly can they get back in service, and COVID has added a fire to that completely.
So you would say anecdotally that all of your time has increased typically with these types of calls with COVID, et cetera?
The pandemic has completely changed medicine in many ways, whether it be the level of protective equipment that we wear for safety purposes to how we clean things. Not saying we weren't clean before, but it's a whole new world that has increased the time from when the tone drops in to now we rethink to what do we need ahead of time before we roll out the door to be prepared and wear the right medical equipment, to what needs to get cleaned when we're at the hospital, what needs to be cleaned when we get back, how frequently we're getting in and out of our own uniforms, men and women are bathing, and having the time to do that. And we spoke earlier that sometimes we take calls from call to call. That is more of our norm now. In addition to that, we have to balance all of these things. And maintaining the staffing model that we have since 1995. In 2001, we got the third ambulance, but it's no longer meeting the demands of what we'd like to see, what I know the men and women that I work with would like to see, and I think what this city expects of us, for sure.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Thank you, and congratulations on your daughter. You spoke about the complexities of firefighting on cheaply made structures versus the older structures. Is the environment also inside more toxic due to more use of plastics and foam and house furnishings that also makes going inside to a fire very more complex and different than might have been 10 years ago or so?
Absolutely. So there's polycarbons in everything, and that when I speak to the kind of the volatility of how fires are started and grow nowadays versus 30 years ago, 40 years ago, lightning difference. We have less than minutes before things are just uninhabitable for people. And with that, because of all these polycarbonates, and even there's studies out now that's saying that our protective equipment for firefighting causes us cancers as well. Cancer rates amongst the fire service are exponentially high in comparative to other occupations. And I don't think there's quite fixes to yet, except early prevention, obviously routine evaluation of firefighters to make sure that they're doing their self-health evaluations, but it's everywhere. I can't go to a conference, whether it be state or nationally, where I'm not meeting people that are either currently battling cancer or have lost coworkers or retirees that have, I know we certainly have our own retirees that are dealing with cancer, recent diagnosis. So it is something that is more prevalent, and I don't know what or how we can do to fix that, but it is something absolutely on the radar that has changed, and I don't think general building construction is going to change at the drop of a hat, so it's something that we need to be prepared for.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. I'm still Roy Schweiker.
Welcome back.
And I was very pleased with the comments the mayor made about the sketchy information we're getting in the service indicators, because that was the first thing I was going to say, is the whole budget package is much skimpier than it used to be. It used to be like every department would give the number of employees in that department and the position titles they had and so forth, but it's like, now the attitude is, well, the city council just votes the way we want it. We don't have to show them anything. I'd like to go back to each department, and the budget package says how many people in each job classification there are, so people can really see the way the city is made up. I'd like to see the service indicators for the fire department, certainly, what do they do and how do they do it and so forth, and throw in the mutual aid calls. Why don't we know how many mutual aid calls there are, and which communities they're to, and which are more and which are less. I know the Franklin at one time was trying to get out of mutual aid because they felt like they were only providing it and not receiving it. And it'd be interesting to know that. I mean, that's a policy question. That's not something that the fire chief should be deciding. But the last thing I want to say is, I went through this probably 10 years ago. I don't know if anybody remembers this or not. Some of you were still in the council then. That you were talking about ambulances and paramedics. Now, my father, his last trip to the hospital, he refused to call the fire department. We had to get a neighbor and load him in the car and take him, because what they have is they have these rescue trucks, a lot of them. There's a rugged vehicle full of all sorts of gear, and they don't have any springs, so you go to the hospital and you think you're bouncing around. He just didn't want to put up with that. He wanted to ride in a car instead. So let's suppose we were to say, okay, we will buy a genuine ambulance, nicely equipped, wonderful ambulance, but it won't have, the rescue equipment. It won't have the jaws of life and whatnot. If we need those, they'll be provided by an engine or a rescue unit, but this ambulance is only an ambulance. And the next thing let's say is, we're talking about paramedics. Why do these people have to be firefighters also? Why don't we hire 4 paramedics, people who are experts in paramedic stuff, the greatest experience in paramedic stuff? But they don't have to use an air pack. They don't have to run into a burning building. All they do is run this ambulance. And we'll station this thing at the central station. It'll handle any ambulance call in the city when it's free, plus a local ambulance will go there too, so you see who gets there first and how fast they can be treated. But they do most of the transports. And that'll keep the peripheral rescue units, whatever you want to call them, available in their stations. And then the central one will be giving people a faster transport and a vehicle that's designed for transporting people and not lugging around gear. If someone's down inside a burning building, well, those people won't do it. You'll get genuine firefighters. But it's very strange to me how, if we have far more paramedic calls than fire calls, everybody in the department has to be a firefighter, but only some of them are paramedics. Let's have some that are only paramedics. And that might make the hiring a lot easier, because you wouldn't have to have people that want to be firefighters and go in burning buildings. You wouldn't have to know how to use an air pack. You only have to do paramedic stuff well. You might get better people. And you might even get them cheaper, because it's reasonable to say someone who's only a paramedic and not a firefighter paramedic should get less pay than a person who's both. So you're getting a better person cheaper. Yet another advantage we have here is you might attract more women to this job. Because, they may not want to be the, people lugging heavy hoses in and out of buildings, but they might be very good paramedics. So you might get more women. And that's an issue the fire department certainly has. They don't have a lot of women. And I know last time I said this, the firefighters jumped on it. You want to pay the women less. Well, yes, if they're only a paramedic, they will be paid less than someone who's a firefighter paramedic, just like a guy who's a firefighter paramedic is going to get paid less than if he had both, if he's only a paramedic. So it's not women are getting paid less. Someone who's only a paramedic gets less pay. They're easier to recruit. They may be more enthusiastic. Not that there's anything wrong with the firefighter paramedics, but someone that specializes, may have more of an incentive to do this. And like I say, this is a problem, because I can imagine the firefighters union, like last time, will say, oh no, we can't have all these women and pay them less. And so, but we have a city manager that has a compensation package of about $250,000. Hopefully he's got the ability to deal with the firefighters union and get them to agree to this. Because the second thing I'm going to say is, and this is once again something we're missing with the fire department, is when do the calls occur? You just heard from the police department, they have more staffing at times when there's more calls. The fire department doesn't. They have the same number of people all the time, basically. And if we were to say, okay, let's figure out when the most calls are and put somebody on for an 8-hour shift to cover the most calls, and then an 8-hour shift, some other time to cover most calls, you could, with only half the people, cover nearly all the excess calls, because you're putting them when you need them instead of spread out through the day. And once again, this is an interesting feature, because if you're a firefighter, you get paid the same amount of money whether you're risking your life running in a burning building, when you're probably getting paid less than half what you should be getting, and when you're asleep in your bunk, when some of those people are getting $60 an hour with overtime for sleeping. So if we discover in the middle of the night, first off, there's not many calls, and secondly, the calls we have, we can service very quickly because there's much less traffic in the middle of the night. We could discover we're targeting the extra people for day shifts only. They can be awake all the time, so they don't have to, wake up, because they're already awake. So you could get a better level of service for less money if you, instead of putting on a full shift of these people, if you said, okay, let's use them when we need them, so we only need half as many people. Let's hire people who are only paramedics for this extra ambulance, so that you'll have people that are perhaps more enthusiastic, and let's get them a real ambulance and not a rescue truck, so it can, maneuver quicker, it's more comfortable to the patient. I mean, I'm one of these people that, one time I saw our ladder truck on I-89 in Hopkinton. Apparently, they called the ladder truck out there to deal with an automobile accident because there was a paramedic on it. I mean, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be using a $1 million vehicle to tow a paramedic out to 89 in Hopkinton. What's he going to do with a ladder? And they can't transport the guy even if he takes care of it. So I think we need the extra ambulance.
What are you doing out in Hopkinton? You should leave Concord.
I don't remember.
I don't recall.
But, no, I think the extra ambulance is important, but I think you need to think about, could it really be an ambulance and not a rescue truck? And could it have paramedics, not firefighter paramedics? And the very last thing I will say is, once again, this is going to be a political issue, and under the policy which you did not approve for conflicts of interest, I'd like to request that those people who were endorsed for the city council by the firefighters union choose not to vote on this. Because, why should they, have one of the sides in this issue, be influencing their vote? So I think let's make it fair. People who were endorsed by the firefighters union don't vote on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none? No?
Just a quick one.
I didn't recognize you, did I?
Oh, sorry, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I'm not sure I agree with the premise that paramedics are less valuable than firefighters, so I'll start there. But my question is, do you not see the value of, not just in the fire department, but any organization where personnel are cross-trained? So depending on what's going on in a certain day, you've got a pool of people you could use in whatever direction, paramedics, firefighters, or whatever it might be?
Well, okay. I will give you the short answer, which of course is yes.
I would love that.
But the long answer is, why is it we have everyone trained as a firefighter and only some as paramedics when there's more paramedic calls? Wouldn't it make more sense to make everyone a paramedic and only some of them firefighters? And the other thing is, does that mean we should train the city clerk as a police officer? Because, you know, she's a city employee and we're short police sometimes, so we could send her out on calls.
I think my question was within a department, not within the city, but thank you.
We don't want Ms. Bonifant with a gun.
It should be tough.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Tessa. I didn't see him, so you're good. Thank you so much. Ma'am. Good evening. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Christine Miller. I'm from Pennacook, and I'll be brief. I'm just here to support the city manager and the fire chief in moving the reserve ambulance to the Manor Station and hiring 4 new paramedics. I don't have to give any other reason than what the fire chief just said. We're in national standards for response time everywhere but Pennacook and wards 2 and 3. So that's all I have to say.
Great.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else like back there? Okay, we'll get you and then back there. How's that? Welcome.
Hello, Your Honor, City Council. My name is Mark Cheever. I'm a new Concord resident as of last year and really thrilled to be here in this community. It's been wonderful getting to know everyone here, and my fiance and I look forward to raising a family here. So I just wanted to first off and start and say that. I just wanted to express my full support for everything the fire chief and the city manager requested here tonight. It seems to me that's a no-brainer in terms of spending valuable tax dollars for this sort of improvement in safety. The staffing makes total sense. I think we can all agree the past 2 years have been incredibly stressful, and I think none more so than our sort of emergency services. So I would wholeheartedly support the investment in the staff that we have, as well as the capital improvement in the ambulance. And I do hope that the Manor Station is fully stocked and ready to go as soon as possible. I think everyone who lives in wards 1, 2, and 3 deserve that as well. And I know the fire station deserves every bit of support that we can give them. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Councilor Critter?
I just want to make sure that we're recognizing Ward 10 as well, that Manor Station serves. This is 4 wards that are impacted by this change, and hopefully temporary change.
Apologies to Ward 10. As I said, I'm new here, so still learning my geography. Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you so much. Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Polly's Bunch. I wrote it down, and I wanted to say that I support the public safety departments, and I support new ambulances, whatever they need, not only for the obvious reasons, but we should be careful to not have the staff spread so thin that they suffer burnout. And I agree about the Manor Station that Christine Miller just said, and I don't know if this is the venue to bring this up, but I'm not in. One of the reasons my husband and I moved here was because of the extensive hiking trails, and therefore I'm not in support of the Langley Parkway extension, and I know a lot of my neighbors support public safety, but they don't support this project, and so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Anybody have questions? Seeing none. Appreciate you coming out tonight. He beat you by that much. Good evening and welcome. I got to see your wife yesterday and you today. This is
Good evening.
Good day.
My name's Alan Hirschlag. I live just over a mile from the Manor Station. I've mentioned before that I've been very fortunate that we have, that I'm in such close proximity to the Manor Station, that the ambulance was stationed at the Manor Station, and that we have an exceptional fire and medical department with the fire department. So to say that I was disappointed when the ambulance was removed from the Manor Station would clearly be an understatement. So I very, very strongly support the 4th ambulance, the additional staffing and the upgrades to staffing. So I would urge folks to, the council, to support those items in the budget. And then I do have a concern for when the ambulance will return to the Manor Station. Hopefully the chief's assessment is correct and we'll have an ambulance in there by October. In the meantime, again, it's been noted that it appears we're the only area, or one of the only areas in the city, that is not meeting the response time. And it was mentioned at a previous meeting by a retired fire captain that the reason that the ambulance, that an ambulance was brought up to Washington Street and then to the Manor Station wasn't because of call volume, but because of response time. So very, very supportive of this item in the budget and would urge you folks also to support it. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, appreciate it. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you.
You want to come up?
Pat Pike from Pennacook. At the risk of piling on and taking up any more air in the room, I definitely want the fire chief's recommendation to bring back the ambulance to the Manor Street Station, Manor Station, and add the requisite number of staff. Public safety is the one thing private citizens cannot do, and we certainly don't want private citizens arming themselves in terms of public safety with police while running around with fire cans and hoses isn't very dangerous. I think you get my point. We can't be doing our own public safety. It's expensive, and no one was ever saved by an average response call. You're saved by when that person shows up to save you. And that, unfortunately, that's just expensive. So thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Fire, last chance. See now, we'll close public hearing. Mr. Manager.
Take your time. They went for water.
Mayor, if I may. Oh, I was just going to mention something. While the city manager is getting ready, I was just going to mention for particularly newer counselors that if you look at the annual report from the fire department, you can actually see a little bit of that service call data. So if you look for Public Safety Advisory Board's minutes from May 3rd of last year in the archives, it actually shows you a breakdown of what types of calls. And then there's a report from the mutual aid as well, which may be helpful for folks until we get that updated data.
Thank you.
Yeah, we recently had a rollover in my ward, and I'm not sure that that's in that report yet. I think we might have had 2.
Okay, general services.
Okay. So the last departmental review for tonight is agenda item number 7 on your tablet. And you want to turn to page 114. So on page 114, revenues budget to budget are up $14,000 or 1.5%. Expenses budget to budget are up $424,000 or 4.1%. This budget increases support for, or additional funds for building materials in the amount of $10,950, chemicals $3,120, fleet outside services $4,000, fleet auto parts $17,000, diesel exhaust fluid $3,400, and highway division wage and labor grade adjustments of $17,000. Also included under the general services are 2 supplemental reports, which you can see on page 115, which you've asked for in the past. The first section for the downtown services shows the costs associated with the downtown services program. For fiscal year 23, budget to budget, the increase is $3,000 due to wage and benefit increases. And the second supplemental report is for the snow and ice control. Expenses budget to budget are up $51,000. This increase is due to wages and supplies increase. Winter maintenance is always a tricky budget because you never really know what the next winter will bring. When we prepared and reviewed the budget, our best guess was that salt prices, to just give you an example, would increase in the neighborhood of 7 to 10%, along the lines projected for inflation. The pricing that we just formalized and got the best price we could get increases salt prices between 26 and 30% versus 7 to 10. If we have an average winter next year, the budget for salt will likely be $75,000 to $90,000 short. If it's a mild winter, we may not be short at all. If it's snowy winter, it'll be quite a bit worse. We'll watch the progress of this expense as we go through. So this is really just since we gave you the budget a couple weeks ago, or about a couple weeks ago and today. To give you an example, salt per ton price for untreated last year was $53.68 a ton. It is now $70.12 a ton. For treated, it was $69.88 a ton. It is now $88.62 a ton. Diesel prices and gasoline are also going to be closely monitored. Our contract for those fuel prices ends in early fiscal year 23. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Was questions?
There's really not much to this. It's quite tight.
Granted it is, but it probably has some of the most great direct impact on our community than any other departments. Yeah.
I just have
Sure, please, Councilor Roy-Sawkins.
I just have a comment that the C-Click Fix program continues to be an added benefit to the city and very helpful investment.
So of the so full-time positions within general services, we have about 112, I think, or so. Can you? Some of these positions are very skilled laborers. Are most of these filled? Are we having any challenges filling these positions? I mean, getting someone with a commercial driver's license can be challenging for any business, including the city, I would imagine. So are we struggling with this at all, or how are we doing?
We are. I think the General Service Department is doing a great job, but one of the challenge, of course, is, as you know, when we do winter maintenance, we use a lot of temporary workers. So making sure that those folks are available with the licenses and know the routes and know the technique that we have is always a challenge. It's more so every day. But when when it comes time to hire a wastewater treatment operator, or with a certain licensing set, or mechanic to work on certain types of equipment, or somebody you can imagine have somebody working in fleet, and all the demands for services out there with vehicles that are already by the private industry, it can be really challenging to attract those people. So we're constantly having to look at the wages associated with that, where we bring them in on the wage scale. But then again, we do have very good working conditions, very good management staff working with those folks, and we've been able to manage for that. But it's been a challenge.
Perhaps I want to ask the same question I asked to finance, and that is the relationship between finance and general services when it comes to utility billing. Are they in sync? Are they do is there training done with the folks in general services in terms of with finance? How do they work together, and how does IT fit in with that as well?
Let me bring somebody up for that. Is anybody?
It was just meant to be a simple question.
Well, we're going to make it very complicated.
We've been waiting so long. Been so patient.
Within utility billing, Councilor Keach was talking about cross-training, so we make sure all people in utility billing that does that type of work are cross-trained, so that if we do lose someone for a period of time, we do have someone to be able to step in and fill that position.
How, since we're talking about cross-training, bridges, for instance, what is the relationship between general services and engineering at times?
Relative to bridges, we're the...
That's just one example. I mean,
okay.
You could do sidewalks, you could do whatever.
Bridges are as far as the inspection of them is handled by engineering. If there needs to be a repair to the bridge, that would be something, if it's within our abilities, we'd undertake or work with them to find someone to make the repair.
Third largest part of the budget.
I know.
Anybody?
It's tight.
Good.
It's tight this year, that's all.
Yeah. I just, since I don't have any more specific questions, I just want to say the depth of knowledge and the leadership of your department is second to none when it comes to across the state. We have, in my opinion, some of the absolute most outstanding employees in general services, and we are incredibly lucky. The number of people who appreciate from how we remove snow and plow, the treatment of, I mean, everyone's got an opinion, trust me. But
Okay.
you know, to the complex things that we deal with in terms of wastewater and water and such, and I, you know, we don't have half the issues that other communities have just a few miles south of us, and I just want to make sure that you know and everyone out here knows how much we really appreciate everything you do. We may not understand all the time, and whenever I talk to, this is kind of graphic and I apologize, but when I talk to, you know, kids groups and school groups and such, and they want to know what city services, you know, we provide and such, and I talk about every time you turn the water on, that's the city. Every time you flush, that's the city. You know, and we don't hear I don't hear complaints. And I think that goes to the excellent service that you all provide, so thank you.
Well, they all work very hard.
Wasn't much of a
making
question,
happen.
but I just
well,
I hope you
appreciate
understand.
it. So.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I'll just add, as someone who has a mother that calls 2 or 3 times a year about an issue, I recommend that she call you folks directly.
The show.
Right. And she does call directly, and you guys are extremely responsive and solve whatever problem she has.
We'll do our best.
Well, I'm thanking you personally because I don't have to make the call.
Councilor Pierce.
Thank you. I mentioned this, I believe, last council meeting, but I think one of the best tools for our citizens is the C-Click Fix. I love that tool. I get to map out my ward so I know what's happening and the response. You know, one day I'll meet Chad J and all those folks, but they do a terrific job and get back to the people on time. And if they can't fix it right away, they're told we can't fix it right away, or it's, by the way, that's a private road, we're not going to fix it. But I love that tool, so thank you for making that work.
Well, it's also helpful for us, and if you folks work with your constituents to move those types of requests to C-Click Fix, we can keep working in that direction.
Anything else? Thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. With that, would anybody like to testify on the general services budget? Everybody loves their road, everybody.
No platforms.
No. Okay, seeing that, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Manager, do you have anything else before we?
So you're going to have plenty other time to talk to general services with the water and wastewater and solid waste funds, as they cover quite a gambit of pieces. And let's see. 15, 16, let me get to my last page. And that concludes the presentations for this evening.
As if on
I
cue.
should have bolded that, but.
I admire the city manager's spontaneity.
It's all scripted.
Okay. So that does conclude the items that we've noticed for this evening, completing general government, police, fire, and general services. I will all remind everybody Monday is a holiday. You should have all got notices for the 2 parades, which are happening both in Pennacook and Concord this weekend. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the city clerk's office or to the manager, and I'm sure they can give you the details. We are meeting again on June 2nd, which is next Thursday at 5:30 again. And I'll just, for the public, and just a quick reminder, we'll be talking about the Community Development Department. We'll be talking about the library and Parks and Recreations, as well as Human Services. And at that time, we will be talking about the Capital Improvement Program, as well as the TIF district. So that will be next Thursday, June 2nd. So put that on your calendar.
Your Honor, are you doing a public hearing for the general services portion?
Yes, she did.
I thought I did.
Oh, no one spoke. Oh, well, I must have missed it. I did not fall asleep, I promise.
Fred, you feeling good about general services?
Yeah.
Okay. Roy, you good? Okay, we're good. See? Look at that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Information, you'll receive all tomorrow, an email. In my newsletter, we'll talk about the parades and all the details associated with that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, with that, I think that concludes the activity for the Finance Committee.
Do we need to accept the minutes from, did we do that? We didn't do that.
You can do that if you like, or you can do it, or you can do
Okay.
it at the next meeting. I had a plan for the next meeting.
All right. Thank you.
Can I get a
To adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
motion made and seconded to adjourn? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it.
You have a ride?